this is Dr. Cooper. I had to split this lecture into two parts because of file size. I couldn't get it to render and upload. We're just continuing where we left off from part 1/A. So let's now compare the shapes of the two pyramids. And I'm just going to play this small video here about the Benben stone, which is a very special stone in the Egyptian religion, which is thought to be the inspiration for the pyramids.
Benben, primordial hill. The Benben stone was a primeval hill on which the creator god Atum first landed. The god looked round and realized that there was nothing around him but darkness and chaos. Desiring companionship, Atum began the work of creation. Atum created Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Shu and Tefnut left Atum on the Benben stone. After some time, Atum is said to have grown worried about his children. Removing his eye, he sent it in search for them. Shu and Tefnut returned with their father's eye, and the deity, seeing his children return, shed tears of joy. These teardrops, which fell on the Benben stone that Atum was standing on, transformed into human beings. The idea of this hair rising had a profound effect on the Egyptians, being used as everything from temple layouts to the possible inspiration behind the pyramids.
So I thought that graphic gave you a good idea of what the Benben stone was, this sacred object in Egyptian religion, where the sun god Atum or Ra, or Atum Ra, as these gods blended, manifested on this mound. He self-created on this mound and began the world. So the Benben stone was believed to be a representation of this original mound and became the focus of the solar cult at Heliopolis, the city of the sun. The pyramid's shape is thought to be a monumental version of the Benben stone, symbolizing the path for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the sun god Ra, or Atum Ra. It was a tangible link between the earthly world and the celestial realm. The capstone at the very top of the pyramid was often made of a reflective material like electrum, which is a gold and silver alloy. And also, this was a type of Benben stone in itself. So the pointed pyramidal shape at the top of an obelisk also represents the Benben stone. And obelisks were erected in temples and courtyards to honor the sun god, and their shape and orientation was designed to capture and reflect the sun's rays. There's a nice obelisk in Central Park, if you've never seen one, an Egyptian one, a real one. So the original Benben stone is no longer in existence, but it was likely a conical or pyramid-shaped stone housed in the temple of Ra at Heliopolis, like I said. Now, we don't really know what happened to the original Benben stone, and it could have been destroyed or desecrated when Egypt came under the rule of foreign powers or underwent religious shifts. Because it was a central symbol of the solar cult, it may have become a target of desecration when those religious beliefs shifted. It might simply be lost to time. As the temple of Ra fell into ruin, a single stone would have been easier to lose or for its pieces to be shattered. And it could have been just reused or recycled and incorporated into a new building or monument, either for its religious significance or just for building material. The pyramid shape itself symbolized the primordial mound from which creation began, but it was also a ramp for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the heavens and join the sun god Ra. And the pharaoh was considered a living god, and his eternal life was seen as essential for the continued prosperity and stability of the entire kingdom. The tomb's contents, including his personal belongings, food, and protective spells, were meant to sustain the pharaoh's spirit for eternity. Qin Shi Huang's tomb, while often described as a pyramid, is technically a pyramidal mound. So unlike the stone pyramids of Egypt, which were built up from the ground, his was an earthen mound, a massive man-made hill. And he chose this shape for several reasons rooted in both Chinese cosmology and his personal beliefs. In ancient Chinese cosmology, a square base with a pointed top symbolized the union of heaven and earth, and the divine connection of the emperor as the son of heaven. This square base represented the earth, while the pointed top, which doesn't actually exist now because it was either flattened or never completed, symbolized the emperor's link to the heavens. So this shape created a monumental landform that integrated his tomb into the natural landscape. As you can see, it mirrors the sacred mountains behind of Chinese tradition. But there was more to the earthen mound than just sacred geometry. It provided an effective way to conceal the tomb's interior. So unlike the Egyptians, who built their pyramids with visible entrances and passages, Qin Shi Huang wanted his tomb to remain a secret, a secure, impenetrable fortress for his afterlife. The sheer size and inaccessibility of the mound, combined with the rivers of mercury and booby traps that are said to be inside, were designed to deter grave robbers. The mound itself was a massive protective layer. The pyramidal mound shape was also a reflection of the emperor's belief that his afterlife would be a continuation of his earthly reign. The mound's interior was an elaborate underground palace and kingdom. The pyramid shape not only secured this underworld, but also served as a ceremonial space. The tomb complex itself, with its gardens and surrounding features, was a microcosm of his unified empire, a place where he could rule for eternity.
A burial complex sealed deep below the earth. But for over 2,000 years, no one has ever laid eyes on this masterpiece. The tomb walls are said to be made from compacted earth, towering 150 feet tall. And the stories claim that at the tomb's core lies a sacred crypt where the first emperor was laid to rest. This tomb may hold the secrets of China's first ruler. But for now, it remains one of history's greatest enigmas. The ancient Chinese were buried with all the items they'd need in the afterlife. The earliest tombs were simple pits containing food and weapons. But over time, the tombs became ever more elaborate. Thousands of items were added: chariots, musical instruments, and ornaments. The tombs became underground palaces built for the deceased to roam in the afterlife. But did the first emperor have even greater ambitions? Stories claim his tomb houses a recreation of all the lands he had conquered. A subterranean empire he could rule for eternity. These ancient legends describe the first emperor's tomb as a monument of unmatched extravagance, filled with underground treasures, including a giant map of his empire crossed with rivers of flowing mercury. But is this bizarre legend true?
So while the two pyramids may look similar, they have an entirely different ethos behind the shape and also have different architectural and engineering styles. The pyramids of Giza are monumental structures built above ground. They are masterpieces of stonework constructed with millions of precisely cut stone blocks, some weighing many tons. Their sheer size, the perfect geometry, and the alignment with the cardinal directions are a testament to the advanced mathematical and engineering skills of the ancient Egyptians. The structures are a display of raw monumental power and are designed to endure for millennium. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang is a mausoleum, a massive complex built almost entirely underground with a large earthen mound covering the central tomb. While the above ground portion is not as visually striking as the pyramids may be, the engineering feat is arguably just as impressive. The vast scale of the subterranean pits and the creation of a miniature landscape with mercury rivers and intricate terracotta figures showcases a different kind of architectural and artistic genius. The focus was on creating a detailed and functional underworld rather than an imposing above-ground structure. What is of great interest to a historian is a comparison of purpose. What were these two huge tombs hoping to accomplish? In order to think about what the Great Pyramid was trying to accomplish, let's first cast our minds back to the sacrifice lecture, where I showed you the mastaba of the second pharaoh of the first dynasty, Hor-Aha, who died around 3050 BCE. So this mastaba included retainer sacrifices of his servants, as well as sacrifices of captives as part of his funeral. In many ways, Hor-Aha's mastaba had more in common with the purpose of Qin Shi Huang's tomb than Khufu's, because these two, the tomb of Hor-Aha and the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, they were both afterlife palaces, places for them to hang out and continue to enjoy the riches and luxury that they'd enjoyed in life after death. By the fourth dynasty and Khufu, who died around 2566 BCE, so about 500 years after Hor-Aha, the ancient Egyptians truly believed that the deceased pharaoh would become a god, an Okha in spirit, and he was expected to be busy in his afterlife, using his pyramid as a staircase to go up into the heaven and plead with the other gods for the benefit of the Egyptian pyramid. His pyramid wasn't just his afterlife hangout, it was also his vehicle to get to heaven and do his afterlife job of persuading the gods to be kind to Egypt. So by contrast, Qin Shi Huang's tomb was a microcosm of the land he'd united and ruled in his life, and he was taking it with him to rule in his death. So what you're looking at here in this carved relief from the temple of Seti, which is the 19th dynasty, is from Abydos. And Seti the first kneels before the god Amun and receives emblems of kingship, conveying his authority to rule. And in his left hand, you can just about see it there. Let me turn my thingy on, just about there. You can see the bird, the bird that represents all of the Egyptian people. and it's called the Rekit bird. So it represents the general population that's being brought under the king's control. So this elegant scene is packed with symbols of stability, life, and eternal rejuvenation, all directed at the pharaoh. And it is about the divine right of the pharaoh, but it's also about the divine responsibility of the pharaoh. So if you're starting to think that Khufu's pyramid is less about his own ego than Qin Shi Huang's might be, then you might be right. Qin Shi Huang wanted so desperately to be immortal that he actually drank mercury every day to try to achieve immortality. And the tomb is in some ways his plan B. If he couldn't stay living and ruling, at least he could stay ruling in death. And he took everything he needed to achieve this with him, including a vast army full of life-size models made of terracotta clay, as well as various models on various scales of everything else he would need to rule the lands that he'd conquered. And as you saw in the video, depictions of these lands surround his body in perpetuity. So the contrast between Khufu and Qin Shi Huang is sharpest when we compare how the labor required to build the two pyramids was sourced. The pyramids at Giza were built with a labor force that consisted of highly skilled and organized Egyptian workers who were well fed and well housed. They were not slaves, but paid laborers, fulfilling a civic duty to their pharaoh, which was a source of national pride. So the project served as a unifying force, providing employment and purpose during the Nile's flood season when the farmers could not work. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang, on the other hand, was built right at the start of the unification of China. And as we saw in the sacrifice lecture, this could be a time when new rulers expressed their power through squandering human lives. And although Qin Shi Huang didn't sacrifice retainers but had clay models made of them in thousands and thousands, he did sacrifice concubines, flesh and blood sacrifices that were to accompany him in the afterlife. So just having unified China by conquering other smaller states, Qin could call on those conquered people to build his tomb, and a workforce of over 700,000 conscripted laborers toiled under a very harsh regime, as you will see in the media for today. So conscripts are forced to work for a certain period, but they're not owned like slaves. So although Qin Shi Huang also had slaves that he captured as prisoners of war that he worked to death building his prisoners. But unlike the Egyptian workers, the Qin laborers were not fulfilling a civic duty, but were compelled to work on a project of unprecedented scale. And instead of being a source of unifying pride, it was a source of great social strain. The tomb's construction reflects the totalitarian power of the first emperor, who was willing to use any means necessary to achieve his monumental vision. So while comparing the size of the pyramid of Khufu and the pyramidal mound of Qin Shi Huang, just as far as size, that doesn't get as far in understanding either Egypt in the time of Khufu or China in the time of Qin Shi Huang. Comparing the landscape, the inspiration behind the shape, the purpose of the buildings, and the labor allows us to say a great deal more effectively about these two building projects and how they reflect the relative stability of regimes, the understanding of rulership, and the religiosity of both Egypt and China respectively, and how this was tied to ideas of divine rulership. Khufu's pyramid had been preceded by others, including 2 built by his predecessor and the one of his son and grandson that stands on Giza Plain, while Qin Shi Huang's, on the other hand, may never have been completed because of the resentment of the newly conquered parts of China, who were being abused as forced labor. So Qin Shi Huang may have been the first emperor to unite all of China, but his dynasty was the most short-lived in Chinese history, lasting only 14 years. When Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE, 2 of his advisors placed an heir on the throne in an attempt to exert control over the dynasty and wield state power. But these advisors squabbled amongst themselves, resulting in both of their deaths and that of the Second Qin Empire. And then a popular revolt broke out, and the weakened emperor soon fell apart to be united again by a new dynasty, the Han Dynasty. I thank you for your attention.